So you did a number of deployments before you were a reservist. How important were those deployments to your, how you saw yourself as a soldier at the time?
Crucial, in a word. I joined to serve, understanding that that's a cliche, but I wanted to be the best soldier that I could be, which meant that I had to get the best training that I could get and as much experience as I could get. So a year after I graduated from trades training, I was asked on very short notice if I wanted to go to Cyprus. Absolutely. So off I went and had a tremendous education there, being assigned to a half British, half Canadian unit. There was all kinds of interplay, if you will. I came home, did some more trades training, was up on exercise in Nanook Lark 4 in Yellowknife in March '77. My OC came in and said, "Hey, do you want to get posted to Germany, to the guns?" I said, "Absolutely." He said, "Good, your Herc leaves on Thursday. Get down, get packed, and catch the plane out of Trenton." So did that. Spent 5.5 years with the guns, which was an incredibly busy time. Just the way it worked out, anybody that was attached to the headquarters as opposed to an individual battery deployed with every time a battery went out or the unit went out. In 5.5 years, I think I was gone something over 4 physically away from home. So, you know, lots of good training, but very telling on the home life as well. Came back, again, got lots of good training here in Calgary. Got posted to Golan in '85. And I showed up, and people looked at me aghast, saying, "Well, they can't send you here, you're Jewish." And I was supposed to go to Beaver House in Kenitra, just across the line. And I said, "Well, I'm not going to tell them if you don't." So I wound up taking over the Finnish detachment in Camp Zwainy. And that was a tremendous experience as well. We had an incident where somebody had to go home early, so I took over the detachment in Damascus for a month. And that was, again, an eye-opener, just being in different places and seeing the different cultures. Came back, got out in '89, was medically released, got better, and in '93 I joined the reserves. So for pretty much the same reason. I was contacted by a friend of mine who said, "Hey, we need a signal sergeant to go to Cambodia." And not knowing how the reserves worked or anything else, I went home and spoke to my wife, and she said, "Yeah, you're good at that stuff, go." By the time I got in, the mission was done with, and I just stayed and kept on with the concept of training. I spent most of my time with standards and the training cell afterwards.
I'm just curious, how would you, you know, as a so-called old soldier, how would you compare the Army that you knew in the '80s with the Army that you just recently retired from?
Opposite ends of the scale. We're much leaner now than we were then. I seem to be more focused now, I think, than we were then. And I look at Germany as the bulk of my time, that being operational in the sense that everything we did had a real tone to it, to the point where sometimes when we went on exercise, the latter part of it, there was a terrorist threat, specifically IRA and Red Brigades. So senior NCOs and officers carried live ammunition on exercise. Now, of course, we're the Army, specifically the infantry, or combat arms, where I spent 95% of my time, is task-oriented. You know, we've just finished Afghanistan. It looks like we're going to be going to Latvia in some amount. So People, I think, are having a narrower focus. People in general are having a narrower focus, and training to a mission as opposed to training to an overall standard.
In terms of your personal satisfaction, was one time period more satisfying for you?
I've certainly had more excitement, for lack of a better term, in the reserves. No, I don't think there was more satisfaction one way or the other, because I looked at it through different lenses. You know, different times of my life, different things going on. As a regular force member, all I was doing was military. As a reservist, I had a whole bunch of other things that were going on as well. So that amalgamation really made life interesting for me.
I think that's an interesting thing to key on. It's just the satisfaction, not so much of the time period, but regular reserve. If you had to choose one or the other, what's been the most satisfying for you?
Regular, because I think I had not as great an expectation. I don't want to say anything lesser, but I could see the path, and I knew what was ahead, and there's lots of branches that I could follow, but I knew where I was going. It was mapped out. On the reserve side, didn't know from one day to the next. It was very much more on the bus, off the bus. So, and some things happened in both instances with great speed, and in others, snail's pace. That's just the way, the nature of the beast, I suppose. But for satisfaction, yeah, I would have to say regular force.
So let's go to your reserve deployments. When you chose to go to Bosnia, so this is the first deployment, I assume, when you actually volunteered to serve. Tell me about your motivation at that time.
I'd tried to go in '94 when 1st Battalion went over, and had sustained an injury, so I wound up not going. In the summer of 2000, I was in Wainwright on a tasking, teaching a basic recruit course at the time. And I was asked, would you be interested in going to Bosnia and running the ranges at Glamac? Because I'm a little bit more conversant with various types of firearms than most people are. So I said, absolutely, this is something that I would love to do. I was currently working for Calgary Police at the time, and they said, absolutely, no problem, we'll give you a leave of absence. My wife said, yep, go. I'll miss you, don't let the door hit you in the bum on the way out. And it was the idea of getting back into harness, almost like the fire horse hearing the bell. Okay, I finally get to go, and this is something real again. So the prospect of being able to do everything in a no-duff situation was very appealing to me. Of course, as per always, as soon as I hit the ground, within hours I was told, no, your mission's changed. You're not going to Glamac, you're going to the Multinational Signals Group in Sarajevo. Okay. Well, nod, smile, re-stencil your kit, and carry on.
What were your expectations? What did you think it was going to be like, Bosnia, at the time?
I'd heard stories from all kinds of people who had been over there. I knew, and watching the news and whatnot, so I knew what to expect with respect to devastation of war, desolation, and of course I'd experienced a lot of that when I was in the Middle East and seen that type of thing. From a military perspective, I was expecting a fairly straightforward job as the ops person running the ranges at Glamac. So I didn't really have a high expectation of any amount of adventure or challenge as far as that went. That immediately went out the window when they sent me to multinational signals. I spent 2 weeks in Sarajevo and then got posted up to Tuzla up north. There's an American Air Force base, or an American Army base rather, with some Air Force people in it. They were having problems with their various communication systems. It turned out that the problems were the people, not the machines. So I went up and sorted it out and changed some people, and they said, okay, well, you might as well stay here and do this. I did, met some great people, built up the detachment, built up our liaison and relationships with our civilian support and the American military support, because this was a multinational group in the detachment. By the time I left, I was the only Canadian in it, but we'd had various others. For the most part during that tour, I was the only Canadian permanently stationed to the base. And just a little bit of a segue, when I reported in, I went and saw the command sergeant major, make your manners. And, hi, I'm Warrant Officer Ostashower. Oh, yes, sir. No, I'm an E6, I guess it was, E7. And he says, oh, come on, I'll introduce you to the commander. Okay. So I met the commander of the 3rd Infantry Div, who said, okay, you're going to be the only Canadian on base. Therefore, I will put you in officers' quarters. He knew what a Canadian warrant officer was. And General Order Number 1, insofar as it applies to alcohol, does not apply to you. Just don't rub my soldier's nose in it. Okay, that's fair. Thanks very much, sir. Off I go. They put me in a sea can by myself. Lovely. I used to have to fly down to Sarajevo once a week, at least, for meetings. It's a 20-minute flight or a 3-hour drive each way. So I flew. The first time I flew down, the Black Hawk was iffy, and they were doing me a favor. So I did my mission in Sarajevo. On the way back, I stopped at the German PX and the Italian PX and bought a bunch of Warsteiner beer, $8 a flat at 24, and some nice Italian Reds. But apparently I bought too much because I couldn't carry it all off the helicopter and had to inadvertently leave 2 or 3 cases of beer and a couple bottles of wine. After that, anytime I called for a helicopter, sure, Chief, what do you want? We'll come and pick you up wherever. And for the next 5 months, that's the way it was. Every month or two, I'd forget a couple cases of beer, and they would magically disappear. And it was a good thing. Nobody got hurt, and it made my life easier. At $20 a month kind of thing, I think I can afford that.
How to make friends and influence people. Right?
Yeah. The Americans, as I said, being the only Canadian there, I was treated royally. When I got to Zagreb and cleared in, 2nd Battalion was there at the time. Here's your pistol, here's your 20 rounds, put it in a plastic bag so you can turn it back in afterwards. Here's your bayonet, here's your body armor and helmet, still wet from somebody else, carry on. And I said, can I test fire my pistol? Can I zero it? No. Okay. When I got to the Americans, I said, can I get some 9mm ammunition? Of course. How much do you want? How many thousand rounds? 20 rounds would be nice. I, of course, amassed more, and when I left, I'm turning in all my kit at Zagreb again. The RQ was going crazy because I can't take foreign ammunition, and what am I going to do with 2,000 rounds of this stuff? So that speaks a little bit to the differences between our forces and the concept. Canadian forces at the time were looking at it as, yeah, okay, it's a mission, but it's not a combat mission anymore. The Americans were still actively patrolling. We had mine strikes both in Sarajevo, the camp in Sarajevo, and in Tuzla. And I was there for both of those. People were killed in both. American servicemen in both cases. And I guess that's why they still took things a lot more seriously than we seemed to at the time. And that seems to be the way that the Canadian military, regardless of whether it's regular or reserve, tends to work. Okay, get in, the work is done, now let's sit back and see what's going to happen. Okay, we don't have to be at stand 2 all the time, so we'll go to first light and last light stand 2s. And then things kind of normalize until something happens, and then we ramp up again.
So between those two, the Canadian and American way of doing business, which one are you most comfortable with?
I can slide between them. I'm most comfortable with the Canadian way. We tend to be much less formal than the Americans are with our dealings with each other. It's not uncommon for seniors to, in our service anyway, for seniors to speak to juniors and refer to them by first name or nickname. The Americans, very, very seldom does that happen. It's between each other and between other nations. It's always addressing a person by rank or position and reinforcing each time, I suppose, that, okay, we're here on a job doing something that we have to maintain at a level of alertness for. I think we look at it and say, okay, we're alert. We get that, so let's not blunt the edge.
Did you think that the Canadians at the time, were we entering sort of almost like a Cyprus mode? Was Bosnia at that sort of stage?
Very much. 2 beer per man per day, perhaps, except in Sarajevo, in Camp Boutmir, where that was the rule, of course. However, when there's 4 or 5 open messes on base, where you can go and get as much of anything as you want, nobody even bothered with ration cards. I think I was probably issued one, but nobody ever asked to see it. And then all the places, when I was up at Tuzla, at Eagle Base, there was a UN shop about 15 minutes away. So I could pop into that, and if I wanted to, pick up whatever, or as I said, when I go down to the various PXs in Sarajevo and pick stuff up. It was very much a Cyprus type of thing at that stage. Yeah, we've got weapons, and I think my rifle's taken apart and in my barrack box, but I'd have to look. So,
what do you think, this is a bit of a tangent, but because of your range of experience, what do you think, what's the place of alcohol when it comes to Canadian troops on operations? What should the policy be, do you think?
I certainly don't think we should be dry. And I'll base that on my experience in Germany. When we were there, bear in mind it's a different time, and I'm talking the late 70s to early 80s now. Literally, I had an officer who shall remain nameless for obvious reasons. We were going on my very first exercise. I was driving him up north, and he looked at me and said, "So are you going to bring the wine or the food?" "What do you mean?" He says, "Well, are you bringing the wine or the food for the road trip?" "Oh, I'll bring the food." "Okay." So he shows up with 3 or 4 bottles of wine, and as I'm warming up the Jeep, getting ready to go, he pops the bottle, "Give me your Milmac cup." You're sitting there driving down the Autobahn having a cup of wine. Obviously there's no way that that is appropriate. But we, the group I was with, never let alcohol interfere with the job. You know, if there's time and if you want to have a beer or a drink, fine. Don't get stupid about it. And even then, we policed ourselves. I've got a recollection of out in the field on one of the reforgers, an American officer being aghast that one of the rat ops was sitting at the table in the M577 command post with a Heineken. And this guy was having kittens. He turned around to the regimental command post officer, tapped him. Captain, your soldier's drinking beer. The captain turned around as he's pouring rum into a cup. He says, yeah, I know, you want one? You know, what's your issue with this? They, of course, were dry then. We didn't abuse it, and I like to think that the soldiers today are at least as mature as we were. And you know, there's always a spectrum. You're going to get the odd person who can't control himself, and that's what his fire team partner's for, in reality. We had occasions in Afghanistan where there was beer laid on. There were certainly times when, all kinds of times when alcohol was available, if people wanted it. But for the most part, they said, no, you know, we're going to follow the rules. If we could legally do it, yeah, we would. But not for the purpose of over-imbibing, because, you know, sometimes it's nice to sit down and have a beer as a social lubricant, an alternative to coffee.
Did you resent the fact that we were predominantly dry in Afghanistan, except for those 2 beers a month?
No, because to me personally, it doesn't make a difference. I've got a huge whiskey collection, primarily because I don't drink much. You know, if I did, I wouldn't have a collection. So it's that's just the way, you know, I am personally. I'm certainly not adverse to having one, but I'll go months and months. And we throw out beer twice a year. It's been in the fridge for 5 months. We'll turf that and go get some more. We keep it so we can offer it to people, and then, you know, if you came over and I offered you a beer, I'd have one with you to keep you company. But, you know, or a whiskey or a rum or whatever it may be.
So going back to Bosnia, ultimately, how satisfying was it for the fire horse that was back in the traces to do that tour?
It was great. I was given a whole bunch of unanticipated tasks and challenges. Every day, I'd get up and say, great, what's going to happen today? Because of my unique, if you will, position on the camp as being not only the only Canadian, but the only warrant officer, and people, most part, didn't know what to do with me or about me, I would be offered all kinds of things. The Americans used to say, hey, we're going to go and do a patrol. Do you want to come with us? Absolutely. You know, so my idea of patrolling and their idea of patrolling were a little bit different. Their idea is, okay, we're all going to cram into Humvees and go drive around. All right. Took about half an hour to figure out that I don't fit in a Humvee at all. And eventually it was, okay, Chief, do you know how to work the 50? Good. You get up behind that. Everybody will be more comfortable and we'll carry on. I didn't necessarily tell my command that I was going out doing that all the time. My Sergeant Major knew I was going, but you don't necessarily have to tell group everything that's going on, as we discovered later on in Afghanistan. So yeah, getting to do things, getting back into harness, learning stuff. The systems that we were using in Tuzla, I'd never even heard of, let alone knew how to manipulate. Fortunately, I had some very, very good people, young USAF airmen, as a matter of fact, I brought in, and I got really lucky. These guys knew what they were doing, taught me, you know, in the standard Canadian Army fashion. Okay, you've been doing this job for 5 months, now we're going to send you to Italy to school for 3 weeks to learn how to do it. Okay. But yeah, it was great. I offered to stay. I asked to extend and was told, nope, you're going home. So I did.
And what was that like? You coming back home, just that transition from this focused, you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow existence to Calgary?
The first and most prominent thing that comes to my mind is the day after I got home. My flight came in, it was dark when I got to Calgary. Got up the next morning and discovered that for whatever reason, I couldn't walk on anything other than concrete or, you know, a hard surface. If it was grass, nope. You know, in theater, everywhere you go, there's signs. Mines, 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 and the skull and crossbones and all this kind of stuff. At home, there's none of that. So in theater, you know, it's part of the backdrop. It's always being reinforced, something to be aware of. When I got home, the most jarring thing was not having these signs. It wasn't not being armed anymore. But great, I don't have to put my sidearm on, wonderful. But it was probably the better part of 6 months before I could go out and walk on anything other than hard surface. And even that was a forced issue. I was chasing a guy, and he cut across a field. You know, I just wasn't thinking. I went and got him, and then afterwards, oh, okay, well, I guess I've broken that barrier. Time differences had a little bit to do with it, but I'm particularly fortunate, I think, in being a signaller and being married to the woman that I'm married to. Early on, actually before we got married, we agreed that every day we would speak to each other, regardless of where we were in the world. At that time, ironically, she was doing most of the traveling. But to this day, I can put my hand on my heart and say I have spoken with my wife every single day. That's exclusive of emails and other things. Sometimes it's only for 10 seconds. But, you know, we've heard the voices, okay, yeah, no, you're all right. And, you know, we've got our own little codes, for lack of a better term. If I don't say something at the end of a conversation, then she'll perk up and know that, well, you know, maybe things are a little bit different now. So far, every conversation I've said the right words. So, you know, there's no anxiety there. And I think that made the homecoming a lot easier to reintegrate, at least domestically. You know, coming back to the unit, to the brigade. That's actually when I first officially went to the Highlanders, is when I came back from Bosnia. So.
Can you just expand on your relationship with your wife a little bit, and just, if I just flip the question to you, why is it important to you and to her that you talk daily when you're overseas?
To maintain our link. She's my second wife, absolutely my be-all, end-all, and I believe that I fulfill that post in her life. It's just something that came about one day in a conversation, and she had to head off to California. She said, oh, okay, I'll call you when I get there, or I'll call you tomorrow. And I said, okay. And she says, wherever I go, I'll call you. And I said, okay, well, wherever I go, I'll call you. And we just kind of took it from there. And that was, of course, in the days before cell phones. So sometimes it was a little bit problematic, but like I said, I'm a signaler, so we can make these things happen.
Let's jump ahead, I guess, a decade. Now it's Afghanistan, different. Maybe before we talk about your tour, what was going through your head as you saw in the Highlanders and other units the deployments of more junior soldiers? What were you thinking as they were heading overseas and having these experiences?
I was frankly a little bit envious. I also thought, good for you. You're getting a chance to do what you joined to do. Specifically as a reservist, you joined up to, as an infanteer anyway, to go over, to defend Canada and Canada's interests wherever that may be required. And of course, as a volunteer, you have to, or as a reservist, you have to volunteer to go over. It made me proud of these young people, and it made me want to go. Of course, I wanted to go anyway. From word one. Eventually, I did a few other things, but eventually it worked out that I got to go, and I was delighted that I got to serve with several Highlanders whilst I was over there. Serve isn't the right word. We bumped into each other in several locations. Some of them were still Highlanders, some of them had done component transfers and were now Patricias. One of them was the DCO of the 4th Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, who had been a Highlander at the time, or prior to that. I've got a picture of us at the airport in Afghanistan. I think there's 6 of us with 4 different hat badges. So it was good. But I guess getting back to your original question, I found it motivating, personally, that these people were going. They were doing long, strenuous workups. They were sacrificing, literally sacrificing family time, friend time, time period to do something that they felt was important. Exciting, yes, but important, probably more so. So, yeah, I found that warming.
How did your wife and family and friends react this time when you told them that, again, I'm volunteering and I'm going to Afghanistan?
My wife was all for it. As she said, when I first joined the reserves, this is what you're good at. Go, do it. It puts a smile on your face, were her literal words. And I thought, it does. This is what I have trained my entire adult life for. So this is what I want to do. And I'll get to my son in a minute, my daughters were both, well, Dad, we're not thrilled that you're going, but we understand. And they're both adults, so, well, okay. My son said, okay, see you there. He was with 3rd Battalion Patricias at the time, and by far my proudest and best day in uniform was October 14th, 2011, when I met his flight coming in. I knew it was going to be my last tour, and it was his first tour. So it was something like coming full circle. He's a little bit bigger than I am, about 3 inches taller, and we both had not regulation mustaches at the time. Mine was far more outside of regulation than his, he being a brand new corporal in the battalion. But, the family as a whole supported it. My siblings were, what for? But, they've been like that my entire military career, so take that for what it's worth.
I'm just curious, as as a father, again, a bit of a tangent, did you have any concerns for your son going over? Even it's something you wanted to do, but any concerns about him going over?
No more than I had concerns for any other soldier. Maybe even a little bit less for a couple of reasons that go all the way back. One, I know all kinds of people in the 3rd Battalion that he was with. Senior NCOs, officers, junior NCOs. As an aside of my own, when he was doing his DP1 and they came to Calgary for the museum tour, he said, "Dad, can I bring some people over to the house?" Sure. This is when I was Sergeant Major of the Battle School. So he brings about 40 people from his platoon over, and my wife had barbecued half a cow and got a keg of beer, and they came into the house and they had a great time, and of course they called him Oz, and every time they called him that I would answer, and they're, oh no sir, no, we'll start calling him Junior now, which of course he hated. But the point is, these were guys that he'd gone through with and he'd known for a long time, and a great number of these people deployed with him. I've been with the infantry enough that I know how soldiers look after each other. So there was no doubt in my mind that he would be as safe as could be given the circumstances. I also knew that he wanted to do this at least as much as I did. So, you know, I met his flight. The ops officer was a little bit hesitant. Well, you know, you can't take him back with you. Yeah, I get that. But it's a war zone. So the guys get there and they're kind of milling around, and I gave him a couple minutes, walked up, we did the hug thing, and I reached into my pocket and gave him 2 or 3 loaded rifle mags and 2 or 3 loaded pistol mags and a couple of grenades. And most importantly, here's a cell phone. It's got 500 minutes on it. Here's a bunch of cards so you can top up. Your wife's phone number is in it. My phone number is in it, and my interpreter's phone number is in it. Phone your wife. If and when you need anything else, you can get a hold of us. You know, so yeah, you're in Kabul, Afghanistan. Op attention has just started. This is Roto Zero for op attention, and you know, here. And nobody said a word about the magazines or the grenades or anything else, except during his tour when people would come, oh, hey Oz, I lost a mag, you know, or have you got 3 extra rounds? You know, so it's all about soldiers looking after soldiers. And
nothing says love like giving your kid a grenade.
Well, you're well familiar with the expression Frago. On one of my grenades, I'd taken, actually one of the ones I gave him, I'd taken some white out and written Oz's frag, just to be different. And people would shake their heads.
Just what any on that tour? I guess. Well, I guess what were your expectations versus the reality of what you encountered in Afghanistan? Again,
very much like Bosnia. A day before I got there, I was told, okay, your job has changed. You're not going to Kandahar anymore. You're now going to Kabul. I was supposed to be 2IC of one of the schools in Kandahar. And now I've become the senior enlisted advisor to the Afghan National Police and the mentor to the Sergeant Major for the Afghan National Police. Sergeant Major is a position that is foreign to them. In any of their militaries or polices, they've never had one before. This is something the Americans have put on them. So they're trying to figure it out, and the senior officers are all Russian trained. So their perspective on things is, if you're not an officer, then you're just filling space. You're a cipher. So I had to teach this young fella, 26 years old. He's the sergeant major for 130 some odd thousand people, or the command sergeant major. He lived on a farm just outside Cabell whose chief cash crop was hemp, and he couldn't understand why NTMA didn't think that that was appropriate. He was there because it was a political appointment, and he had really no interest in doing anything except, you know, going to work, getting paid, and going home again. But I took him out. We toured the country. We drove around. We flew around somewhat. He wasn't fond of flying, so we did a lot more driving than flying, mostly in soft-skin vehicles. And I tried to instill in him all the things that I'd learned about leadership over the years. One day near the end of the tour, he came to me, he said, "We're going to go and visit the police hospital. I want to go see some of my wounded men." And I was delighted. You know, I was appalled, of course, at the wounds, the horrific wounds that some of these people have suffered. It very much brought to mind some of the stories that you've seen of World War I. Anyway, I won't go into that. He went, introduced himself and myself to the head of the hospital, told him why we were there, and then the head of the hospital took us around and explained each patient, gave his name, when he, all males, when he'd been wounded, how his care was progressing, and then the Sergeant Major took over and said, you know, "Are you getting paid? Is your family able to come and visit you? Are you getting the right medicines? Do you have to pay for the medicines?" Because sometimes that was happening. And it was very much a platoon leader's book type of thing, and I was very proud of him at that point. I was very proud of him. It enabled me to exercise everything that I had learned, both in the military and through life, about dealing with people. This, the Afghans loved. I was bald, of course, and we weren't allowed to grow beards, but I had my handlebar mustache, and they loved that. You know, that, "Oh no, we know who you are. We don't have to see your ID. We'll look at everybody else's, but you're okay." You know, so when you're the big guy walking around, and of course, there's no time. I could go on and on about this tour forever. Unquestionably, the best tour I've been on, not only because my son was there, best group of people I've worked with. In my cell, there were only 3 military people, an American full colonel, an American lieutenant colonel, both military police, and myself. All the rest were either American contractors or Canadian policemen, most of whom from Calgary, whom I knew, coincidentally. So it made for a very good work environment and a very close relationship. I'm still in email and telephone contact with all of these people, including, as a matter of fact, my Afghans.
Is there another day besides that hospital visit that stands out for you as being memorable?
For different reasons. The first time I went to Kandahar, we landed at the airfield and got put into a convoy of armored vehicles to take us out to one of the American camps, about a half-hour ride. The Canadian tack vest doesn't fit me when I've got my armor on. It just doesn't work. So I wore my own tack vest. Well, fine, not a problem. I've got everything I need. I'd neglected to button up one of the pockets at the top. So and oddly enough, there's a grenade in it. So we got to the camp and got out of the vehicle, and there's a bunch of Americans standing around, and I bent over to tie up my boot or whatever it was, and this grenade falls out of my pocket, goes thunk, roll, as it's hitting the safety lever. And there's an RCMP sergeant with me who looks over, shakes his head in disgust, picks up the grenade and hands it back. And all the Americans had just gone dead white. You know, guys, look at it. The safety clip is there. The spoon is on. What trade are you anyway? But it turns out I left my ID in that vehicle. So they didn't check my ID when I got on the flight to go back to Kabul. Didn't need it until I was going into the mess hall, or the DFAC, to eat that night. And this isn't a good thing. And the command sergeant major down there wound up with it and brought it back personally. So I gave him a Highlander coin. Just because. But, you know, there's lots of things. Getting shot at, we always had civilian vehicles in Kabul and wherever we went. The only time I got shot at in Kabul was within 500 meters of Camp Eggers, which is where I was based out of. So it was on either the in route or the out route. We'd take around. Oh, okay, I had more policemen, Afghan policemen, point their weapons at me than anybody else. Day after Christmas, 2011, we had 2 guys that we worked with were killed with a green on blue. They were in their offices, their one office, and their driver came in. They turned around and said hi, and he said hi and pulled his pistol and killed them both. Master Corporal Grief, when he was killed, that was a bad day. The only Canadian casualty on that tour, the last one over there, killed. And I was loath to try and contact my son. And for the same reason, because all we knew was that somebody had been killed, a Canadian had been killed. I didn't want to phone him, he didn't want to phone me. And eventually, Russ Meads, as a matter of fact, phoned me up and said, "Oh, okay, just checking to see that you're okay. Rye was worried." Thanks. You know, that's a good thing. And then we went back. But yeah, these are red letter days. Greff getting killed, meeting Ryan. Ryan was born when I was in Cyprus on my first tour. So that's part of the full circle thing. And originally, we'd actually been scheduled to do the decompression at the same time. And I said, no, the last thing you want is me cramping your style, and vice versa. So.
As you brought it up, so what was the, heading home from this tour, what was the decompression like? And how useful was it?
For me, I don't think it was tremendously useful. I of course, can't speak for others. It was a very pleasant time. It's the first time I'd been back to Cyprus. Well, I was there for a day in '78, but it was the first time I'd been back since then. And of course, things have changed dramatically from when I was there. But I was with a group of people that I had known for years, every one of them. I think the most recent relationship went back 10 years. So these are guys that I'm comfortable with. And we share common bonds prior to that. And we went out and we had lunch and we did lots of walking around and we rode the donkeys and we did all the things that you're supposed to do. And of course we attended the classes. Slept a lot. And yeah, for me, I don't think there was much actual decompression happened there. I didn't realize until I got home that I was as angry as it turned out that I was. we'd had some information and some things said to us by the command element in theater that really stuck in my craw and made me question things. So that kind of ate at me my last 2 or 3 months there, and to a certain extent now. So anyway, yeah, it's something that I think was a good idea and very useful in differing qualities and quantities for everybody.
So what was it that stuck in your craw? What were you told?
We were told that the NATO training mission, Afghanistan mission, was to go and train with the army, the police, the various sections of the police. But we're not going to do that. We're going to stay in our camps and not go around anywhere. So yeah, unless it's your absolute duty to leave a camp, don't. And oh, by the way, we're looking at cutting the budget by 25% for the Army. Oh, and why are you telling us this here and now? Literally, I got that on the same day that I was coming home on leave. Shakes the floor. So, yeah, one of them came from the commander in CCTMA, and the other one came from the commander of the Army.
Yeah, I mean, as I recall, there were some real limitations in terms of, and for safety reasons, leaving.
Well, you had to call in, and this is who I am, and this is who we are, and this is where we're going, and we've got the Blue Force tracker and all this kind of stuff. But we had to do it with the Americans, or with NATO, and then we were supposed to do it with the Canadians as well. And the Canadians, for some reason, were of the opinion that we were asking permission. No, I'm not asking you, can I do this? I'm telling you I'm going to be doing this. And that, go away, puppy. That caused a little bit of an issue. And finally, I just stopped talking to him. So, and nobody ever said anything. I would suspect nobody was the wiser. You asked about days that stand out. February 2012, my RCMP sergeant that I referred to earlier didn't show up to work. So I sent a guy who came back and said, he's really sick. And we went and looked, and he was obviously very ill. I took him to the Roll 1 hospital, or medical unit that we had. They took one look at him and said, we think he's having a stroke. We can't do anything for him here. He's got to go to Bagram right now. So, okay, and they phoned and arranged for a medevac, but it had to leave from the airport. We had 2 up-armored vehicles. Go away. I ordered, I got our 2 vehicles, got a bunch of other people. We loaded this guy into one of them, an expedition. And a Canadian Navy captain came up and said, what are you doing? So I explained it to him, and he says, oh, well, that's not your job, so you can't leave camp to do that. You just wait here, and we've got some drivers. They'll be by in 3 or 4 hours. So I said, yes, sir, and he walked away, and I got in the truck and drove away and took my guy to the airport. Got him, and there's 2 Blackhawks. God bless the Americans. They're just waiting for him. They put him on a gurney, in he went, and off they went. I got back, and this captain is standing there, livid. I told you not to go. You know you're not supposed to go. Blah 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 blah. I'll have you on charges. And I said, sir, if you want to go to Patricia, Major General, and tell him that one of his sergeants major disobeyed the rules by looking after his men, go right ahead. Tell me how that's going to work out for you. And those were the last words we spoke during that tour. But I was angry. We were penned up and just made a better target. I know the reason we were penned up, and it's all political. So that's one of the reasons I was angry.
So ultimately, how satisfying was that, your last tour, your final tour?
As I said, my final tour was by far my best tour well, in every respect, but especially in self-satisfaction. I was given left and rights of arc and told, go do what you need to do. So the micromanagement that I encountered in various other places before wasn't there. It was very much, you're a big boy, you know what to do, go do it. And you know, you are responsible for your own actions. And by the way, you're responsible for the actions of this guy you're mentoring as well. It kind of put a weight on, but it was a good weight, and a real sense of accomplishment when we went to the hospital. In particular, the General Atmar, Lieutenant General Atmar, was the chief of the Afghan National Police. He called me in one day and said to me in English, which surprised a lot of people because most people didn't think he could speak English. He said, "Make my sergeant major like you." You know, I didn't know how to react to that. Yes, sir, obviously, and salute, and away I went. It's the only time he ever spoke to me directly, and it was a very special thing. I was honored and tremendously complimented that he would say that for several reasons. You know, one, he acknowledged the sergeant major. You know, he hadn't even done that prior to this, so it let me know that I wasn't just spinning my wheels. So I got something done while I was there, and it was a good feeling.
How would you compare your first tour as a young soldier with this last one, and the army that you're serving with at the time? You just say Cyprus to Afghanistan.
Diametrically opposed. When I went to Cyprus, I was a no-hook private, and they were still shooting at each other. Occasionally, you know, it was a year and a half after the war. And the job I had in Cyprus was not very taxing. You know, when I was up on Troodos for 3 months, it was 24 hours on duty, which meant that ideally you wear your UN ball cap. But we were in a detachment where nobody came around, and all we had to do was maintain the radios. Then when I went to the line crew, we built masts and antennas. So, you know, that was fun. But I had no responsibility to anyone other than myself and my superiors to be at the place that I was told to be. In Afghanistan, I was told, here's your job, figure out the best way to do it, and do it. And, you know, mentor is your prime job, but you'll also be speaking with the American general, or generals, with and without your colonels, to give them your view on what's going on. So I had to familiarize myself with the big picture and be able to answer questions as to, you know, what's going on here, there, the other place. Is it good? Is it bad? We know what they're telling us. Now you tell us what you're seeing. There was an extra set of eyes on the ground where typically they wouldn't have had any insight before. So yeah, it was kind of chest puffing in that respect. So yeah, I started small and I ended bigger, I guess would be the best way to phrase it, in all respects.
And you said you came back from Afghanistan, you were dealing with some anger that you didn't think you had.
Yes.
What else did you have to deal with as part of the transition back to life here in Calgary?
People not understanding, I think, what was going on over there at the time. Even people who had been there before during the various rotos, you know, they said, "Oh well, yeah, you're op attention, and you know, you're teaching." Well, I was op Athena too, and I was traveling all over the country, and I probably spent more time on the road than most of you guys did, but none of that, you know, none of that is germane to anything. I think what got to me was the them and us attitude that wasn't prevalent, but it was there, you know, especially amongst the less mature soldiers. Those who had some of the edges knocked off over the years said, you know what, it really doesn't matter if it's a fine blade or a coarse blade on the meat grinder, it's all a meat grinder. So the civilians, most of the civilians I know what I do and know what I've done, so you know, that was not an issue. Accepting that I was angry and that I had changed significantly from the time I left home in July until I came home in April. And it was impacting the other people in my life, my family in particular. So understanding that, yeah, I'm not going to be able to fight this thing myself, but there are lots of places to get help. And as I said to you earlier, I met this tremendous pumpkin doctor who is phenomenal. And there's a bunch of stories I can go into there, but not relevant. So,
how would you describe the help that you've accessed through the military or other services? You know, has it been adequate? Has it been frustrating? What's it been like for you?
First off, I'll say priceless. Secondly, I would say mostly adequate. There have been some, and still are, some particular stumbling blocks. Ironically, literally this morning, I wound up speaking with pensions again, and they said, "Oh yeah, well, we'll get around to paying your pension soon." Okay, you know, I've been out for a year now. July 2nd last year was when I became a civilian. You guys can start anytime you like. I'm not going to die, and I'm not going to lose the house or anything, but come on, you know, this is a little bit ridiculous. My pumpkin doctor said, "You would be a really good candidate for a PTSD dog." You know, I was diagnosed 4 months after I got back as having severe chronic PTSD, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I've always been an animal kind of person, the bigger the better. The psychiatrist in Edmonton, military psychiatrist, said, "Yeah, you'd be a good candidate." The doctor here in Calgary said, "Yeah, you'd be a good candidate." The people who were providing service dogs or offering their service to provide service dogs said, "Okay, yeah, we'll get you a small spaniel or a retriever." I said, no, I want a big dog for lots of reasons, one of which is I'm a fair-sized guy. "Oh no, big dogs are socially unacceptable. You can't do that." So my wife has gone out and spent several $1,000s on this dog that I have now, Maccabee, and his training and my training. I found out last week that there's some groups who are looking at funding the dogs. I think they're only on the West Coast now. But you know, they're funding feeding and training and purchasing and all that. And I'm not asking anybody to look after me. I'm just saying stop putting roadblocks in my way. Because that just makes me angry again. And then we've gone full circle. So kind of defeating the purpose.
Is there anything that we haven't talked about or that you haven't said that you would like to finish on?
When I came back from Bosnia, the Highlanders offered me a home and a job as the signals warrant, and then later on as CSMB company. I stayed with the Highlanders for several years. Then I had to go over to the signals and do my thing with them. Then I went off and did some other stuff and came back. I actually got out in '06, the end of '06, and came back in '08, injured. When I was fit again, I was looking for a place to get back in, because categorically I wanted to go to Afghanistan in uniform. And the Highlanders offered me a home again, which I gratefully and I hope graciously took. The Patricias taught me the meaning of regimental family. Real quick story, 2 weeks after I got posted there in '86, my grandmother died. I phoned the duty officer, told him what was going on, who also happened to be the SIG-O, and he said, okay, swing by, pick up a pass and go up. So I went up to Edmonton. The next day I get a call from Master Corporal Ostashower. My dad and I had just come back from identifying the body. And I'm thinking, pickles. They just can't leave well enough alone. There was the company clerk saying, the OC says, take a couple, his condolences, take a couple weeks, we'll get everything sorted out when you get back. Oh, okay, that took me by surprise. And he says, now from the CSM, and I'm thinking, here it comes. He said, never mind a couple weeks, PCS doesn't start until September, take all the time you want, and none of it will be accrued to your annual leave. We understand your grandmother's from the UK. If you want, we'll make arrangements for the body to be repatriated with you and your parents taking her. And in that instant, it went from Pickleys to Patricias and has never changed. My son's a Patricia. For years, the only coin I carried was a Patricia coin. The Highlanders have carried on that sense of family. Of all the various units I've served with, those are the only two that have done that. So when people talk about regimental family or military family, without experiencing it firsthand, I don't think it's something that anybody can truly grasp. It's like going to a war zone. If you haven't done it, you can't understand it. Explaining color to a blind man.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.